Everyone should be, everyone should go through the same torturous punishment that we did when we were in high school, at least me.
Hey, now, Mark, parents will sue you.
You're probably right. But it was funny. I can remember the days that I did a term paper. Now, I was one of those that always waited to the very last minute. Oh, Mom, my term paper's due. Really, when? Tomorrow. One of those kind of things. And I turned in just enough pages with just enough words, double, triple spacing, everything you could get away with, right? But can you remember having to research for your term paper? Okay? So some homes were lucky enough to have a set of encyclopedias. Boy, we thought we had all this info. Look at these cool books. Does anybody do they even print encyclopedias anymore? Because everything's available online. So you might have your encyclopedia. You might have some nice dictionaries, thesaurus, all this stuff. Reference books on your topic at the home, at your house or whatever. If you didn't have those, what did you have to do? Go to the library. I know they still have library buildings. I don't know what's in them anymore. I haven't been in one for a long time, but you had to go to the library. You had to get your parents, take you to the library, find your stuff. Your research to do a simple term paper might take you hours, weeks, to get all this stuff together to prepare if you were really going to do a decent job at it. It took a long time to put all this together, and then you've got to cite your sources and all this stuff, right? But we're going about and trying to get this stuff up and collect all this stuff to finish your assignment. So what about today? How long do you think it would take you to find, just think of any topic off the top of your head. Probably less than 5 seconds. If you put in a couple of keywords, what you're searching for, Google search, whatever browser you use, whatever search engine, you could search something up and you could have thousands of sources of information on any topic, right? So is this good or bad? Both, thank you. It's good with the constant potential to be bad, right? Anybody in here use YouTube for anything? Now, I use it for YouTube University. I don't know if any of you ever thought of that. It's a website, so those of you who don't do YouTube, website where people, individuals, businesses, anything, groups with some activity will post a video online, and sometimes they're just goofy, meaningless stuff some kids put up. They call it little shorts now. Or it could be some kind of an instructional video to do something, which is very handy, by the way. Just this year, I have learned to do things like fix my top-loading washing machine and install a remote starter on Trish's van out on the parking lot. That's a good use of the internet, is it not? I mean, I've used it to learn how to do something. Donna, I don't know how to take that look. We'll just stay away from it. But there's just, you can use it for something very positive. I needed information on this. I had immediate access to it, and within a couple of minutes, you too can be a dishwasher repairman, that kind of thing. It's very helpful. I like saving money. If I don't have to pay somebody else to do it, and if it's something simple I could do on my own, by all means. But like anything else, all this access can be abused, can it not? There's a fairly common saying, y'all have probably heard it. People say it kind of tongue in cheek. It's on the internet, it must be true. Right? Not hardly. Unfortunately, there are people out there who purposefully, maliciously like to use that access and our naivety, to spread misinformation. They either make something up, it's done to harm somebody, or just to cause some kind of division or discord. We certainly don't see that today, do we? Why would they do that? Why would somebody take such a useful tool and use it to do the opposite of what it could be used for? Because they can, that's okay.
15 minutes a day.
Okay. I really believe there are just some people out there that are bad, just bad people. I've got a friend who, and he says this kind of tongue in cheek a lot. I'm not happy till you're not happy. And sadly, there are people out there that's their goal in life, is just to disrupt everybody else, to cause division. We can't have people happy. Let's get past that. Just can't have it. But there are people that they like to cause confusion. They like to do all this stuff. There's talking about this stuff, just because it's out there, does that make it true? There's another meme. It's another internet thing. Have you ever seen this one where it says, I've Googled all my symptoms. I either have stage 4 cancer or a hangnail. Have you seen those? Because realistically, when you do those searches, the answers you get back could be from this extreme or this extreme, or fall somewhere in the middle there, right? We have to be very discerning about what we pick up on and what we read, what we think is being presented to us as a truth or something that's factual. Just because you read it, I saw 4 sources I did a Google search, I got 4 sources, and they all say the same thing. Not necessarily. We really have to be careful with what we are assuming is the truth just because it's on the internet. Now, in the time of Jesus' ministry, he had his own form of malicious misinformation working against him. They were called the Pharisees. Okay? Anybody know what the Pharisees used to do? Now, these were religious leaders, right? These were people that were supposedly leading God's people, God's nation, according to God's law, God's word. Everything should have worked out just great, right? What was the problem with the Pharisees? They liked their position, didn't they? They liked being able to be in a position of authority over people. So sometimes the rules got made up, got added to, that were going to suit their goals and where they wanted to be, in their positions of power. They were certainly in a position of power with God's people. So just like today, the Pharisees of that time, and not just the Pharisees, we'll read about a couple of them this morning in the lesson, not just the Pharisees. I like to take whatever reason they had and cause division among the people, make sure that nobody tried to rise up to a point above their station to jeopardize where they were. We're not going to put up with that kind of stuff. And so it was a real issue. And so our lesson this morning is Jesus addressing his disciples to beware of this, and he calls them leaven, and we'll talk about that in just a minute again too. All right, so let's read through this and then we'll talk about it, and hopefully you guys will see where I try to tie all this stuff together. In Mark chapter 8, verse 11, I'll read the first verse, you guys read after me. And it says, "And the Pharisees came forth and began to question with him, seeking of him a sign from heaven, tempting him. The ship again, departed to the other side.
Now the disciples had forgotten to take bread, neither had they in the ship with them more than one loaf.
And he charged them, saying, Take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of the leaven of Herod.
And they reasoned among themselves, saying, It is because we have no bread.
And when Jesus knew it, he saith unto them, Why reason ye, because ye have no bread? Perceive ye not yet, neither understand? Have ye your heart yet hardened?
Having eyes see ye not, and having ears hear ye not, and do ye not remember?
When I break the 5 loaves among 5,000, how many baskets full of fragments took ye up? They say unto him, 12.
And when the 7th among 4,000, how many baskets full of fragments took ye up? And they said 7.
And he said unto them, How is it that ye do not understand? He says that to them a lot through the New Testament, by the way. All right. So let's think about this for just a minute. In the first verse, I'm not going to read that one again. The Pharisees came up to Jesus. Everywhere Jesus went now, he's followed by lots of people. He's drawn all kinds of attention. There are people who have heard his words, seen his miracles, his healings, and they wanted more. They wanted more of the truth that Jesus was talking, what they were seeing from Jesus. There was something about Jesus, something about the words that he spoke, the things that he did, that they wanted more. They knew that they needed that. They were drawn to it, and they were just followed him. They were just willing to put whatever aside and just follow him, right? But along with that came others that didn't want anything from him except for him to stop, right? Because those Pharisees, they didn't want unity among the people. They didn't want the people looking towards something else. Here's this new message, this new guy talking this stuff, and of course they try to jump up. He's speaking blasphemy. You can't listen to this. He's doing this. He's doing that. So in addition to all the people who were truly following him, realizing that I need something from this guy. I need something from Jesus. I want to get closer to him. There was a lot of those. The Pharisees didn't like that. They didn't want any part of that. So their thing was they were going to follow him too, but it wasn't because they wanted to hear his truth, his words. They wanted to tear him down. They wanted to find some fault in what he was doing to where they could convince the people that this guy's a charlatan. You can't listen to what he's saying. So they were trying to get him to stop. These were people who had something to lose. Now, think about this. Most of the people who followed Jesus, come to Jesus, you've hit a point in your life, they hit a point in their life, they knew they were lost, they needed to be saved. We all got to that point, right? We wouldn't be here this morning. They had something to lose. They had position and power and authority, and they were not going to let anybody jeopardize that. There were people with political positions, the religious leaders. Jesus was a threat to that way of life. So their following him around wasn't because they wanted something from him. They wanted to derail him, right? So they had spread a lot of misinformation for a very long time, the Pharisees had. You know, they added all of their laws on top of God's laws, and they made it seem as if it was God's law. False teachers, we call those now, right? We see a lot of that out there today too, don't we? People who get the microphone in some capacity, their way of life or whatever, and they stand up and they spout out some truth, and people flock to it and listen to it. We see it all the time. We see some, I'm going to kind of break off the lesson here just a minute. I cannot for the life of me, have y'all been watching the news about what's going on with the college campuses? How did we get to that point? What kind of misinformation was spread that somebody would believe? College kids, kids who are, mommy and daddy are paying for them to be there, to be doing this, death to America, death to the Jews, death to Israel, oh, let's go Palestine.
But Mark, I don't believe that he said those kids, they're on a free ride.
Yeah, they don't know what they're
From
doing.
another country.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah. They are, but a lot of these are American kids. And now here's what's funny. We have American corporations that are funding these and bringing in professional protesters to get these kids riled up. How did we get to this point in this country? All right, anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to go off that far. So again, the Pharisees, they followed Jesus too, not to learn, but to cause him to fail. So these Pharisees, they were anything they could do to trip Jesus up in some way. They were trying it. So they kept coming up to him, show us a sign from heaven, show us a sign, show us a miracle, do something. That's what we learned in verse 1, or verse 11 there. Jesus looks at these people. He answers them. You know, they're wanting him to do something. And Jesus answered them, and you think about this verse. You know, we read all the time, Jesus is fully human, fully God, right? Fully man, fully God. We see a lot of reactions from Jesus in this passage that do show his humanity. He looks at them and deeply sighs. That's what the word says. He sighed deeply in his spirit and said, why doth this generation seek after a sign? Verily I say unto you, there shall no sign be given unto this generation. And in verse 13 it says, and he left them, and entering into the ship again departed to the other side. I believe that this kind of behavior on the part of the Pharisees was tiresome to Jesus. For him to listen to their questions and just, yeah, that's the way we react, right? I am so tired of hearing this. Kind of that sort of reaction. But he just comes back, he gives this deep sigh, and he asks, why does this generation seek after a sign? It's almost like he's thinking, what else could you need? Didn't Jesus begin his ministry with miracles? And all throughout his ministry up to this point, miracle after miracle after miracle. These same people had read all the miracles of God all their lives. They're all familiar with Scripture. These are learned men. They're the religious leaders, the ones that know all the Word of God. They knew what had happened, what God had done. They've seen what Jesus has done over and over and over and over. All of these miracles that he's done, all of the things that he's done up to this point, it's like, isn't this enough? Haven't you seen enough miracles to keep going? Jesus looked at him and just simply said, there will be no sign given to this generation. He and his followers simply get on the ship, and they left for the other side of the sea. Now, something that I noticed in this passage that just kind of stuck out to me, and notice what Jesus did not do when confronted by these people. Let me ask you a question. If somebody questions you, what you're doing, what you're thinking, what you're believing, anything, somebody questions you, what's your reaction? Take it, go on the defensive. You want to start arguing, let's kick this up a notch. All right, let's go. That's what we're ready. You don't question what I'm saying. Not Jesus. Jesus didn't argue, didn't try to pound it into them. He had been speaking the truth. He had been showing them signs. And they come to him with this request. He's troubled about it. I just can't help but think it had to be very disappointing. And then he just, you know what? You're not going to get any signs. And he turned around and walked away, and they sailed to the other side of the sea. How much different would our lives be? And I say this a lot. If that's another example from Jesus showing us how we're supposed to live our lives. I think it's one we overlook. We don't have to argue everything. We don't have to take that to the next level. Just accept, I'm not, you're not going to change my mind. I'm sorry you're trying to catch me up in this or whatever. Not going there with you, and just simply walk away. We like to get that last word in, don't we? All right, so Jesus left it alone. He walked away and went on. So in verses, and I'm going to read 14, 15, and 16 together. This is funny. This is a funny thing about the disciples, I believe. Now the disciples had forgotten to take bread. Neither had they in the ship with them more than one loaf. Now, I don't know how many people are on this ship. And he charged them, saying, take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of the leaven of Herod. And he charged them, and they reasoned among themselves, saying, is it because we don't have any bread? I think we can all tell from this passage of verses, all of this really, that the disciples had been heavily influenced by the leadership of the Pharisees up to this point, right? They've been spoon-fed all this stuff that the Pharisees have been going out all their lives, right? The Pharisees have been around for a long time. They've been making up their own rules and telling people whether you're right or wrong and doing all this for many, many, many years. So everybody that's growing up in this community, this nation of God's people, they're all living by what the Pharisees have told them all along. This is before Jesus came along, remember? So obviously there's some influence of the Pharisees on these people. They can't help it. That's just, they've been spoon-fed. All their buttons have been programmed, all this stuff. So they often missed a lot of the spiritual truths that Jesus was trying to express to them, even his closest followers. You got to remember, they've only been following him now, and I don't know how far into Jesus' ministry, but we know there was only 3 earthly years to begin with. It's hard to undo a lot of stuff that the world has been doing to you all along, all your life, up to that point in a short amount of time with the Lord, right? So once they get on board, they go on board the ship with Jesus, and they realize they hadn't brought any food with them. And all they could come up with on this ship of however many people was a single loaf of bread. So while they're trying to figure out what they're going to do about dinner, Jesus gives them a warning, seemingly out of the blue. To them, it was out of the blue, okay? And he gives them this warning. Take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of the leaven of the Herod. And again, the disciples, these spiritual men following Jesus, Lord, is it because we didn't have any bread? What is Jesus warning them about? What is the leaven of the Pharisees or the leaven of the Herod? Evil? Anybody?
It focuses it up. It's just up there to something it's not.
Okay, all right. Jesus is trying to get them to understand the leaven of the Pharisees, the leaven of the Herod. And by the way, the Herod is the political group in charge from King Herod, right? The Pharisees were religious, the Herod were political. False teaching, misinformation from these people. These are the representatives of the religious leaders and the political powers of that time. And Jesus is telling them, beware of the leaven of that. So why do you think that Jesus would use leaven to describe what they're doing? So first of all, we've got to know, what is leaven? Okay, basically yeast, right? It is the material that causes bread dough to rise, right? How much does it take? Little tiny bit. Goes a long way, does it not? How does it react? When leaven comes in contact with the dough, how does it work? What happens? Spreads, does it not? You know, you think about this, that very little bit of leaven will spread through all the dough that it comes in contact with. Think about that. Spreads through everything it comes in contact with. If you took a little bit of the bread dough that you had added yeast to, leaven, little piece of it, and then you put that in a ball of dough that had no yeast in it, guess what? It's going to spread through that one too, and it's going to continue to go. It will continue and continue and continue. Think of it, it acts like a bacteria. Now, for a long time, I thought it actually was a bacteria, yeast was, but all the sources I read while studying this, yeast is not a bacteria, but it acts like one. It spreads. So think about that. So if the Pharisees have a little misinformation or start to spread a little disinformation, what could happen to that leaven left unchecked? It's just going to keep going and keep going throughout all of God's people, right? Might start to believe that. Boy, we don't have that going on today, do we? It doesn't matter what kind of yeast you throw out there today, somebody's going to eat it up. And, oh, it must be so. It's on the internet too, so there's a double. You know, Jesus wants his people to be careful about what they take in from all of these misleading people. So all that stuff I gave earlier about the internet, think about that. You expose yourself to a little misinformation, a little untruth, a little whatever, and you read enough sources that you think, well, it's right there on the internet, it must be true. Do you see what a devil's tool it could be left unchecked? Jesus is trying to make sure that his people, you have to be careful of that leaven from those Pharisees. You have to be careful of that leaven, that yeast, from those religious leaders, the Herod. if you let a little bit of that in, you let some of that have some control in your life, left unchecked, it's probably going to spread all through. You might spread it to somebody else. It's going to do exactly what it was designed to do. It's going to just keep on moving. And Jesus is trying to get his followers, look, just because they said it, just because of this, doesn't make it so. All right? So that's what he's trying to get them to understand. That's why in verse 16, he reasoned with it. And of course, you know, the disciples, they listened to his warning. Watch out about this leaven. Well, they were focused on bread, right? They missed completely what Jesus was trying to talk about. You know, beware of this because they're hungry. Now, I know I made a joke about this a few weeks ago, but this one reminded me of the same thing. Maybe God's trying to tell me something. You know, we come in here and we listen and we get fed by the preacher back here. Don't be thinking about that bread too much when we get home. It'll still be there when we get to the house, all right? Okay, anybody have a comment before we go on?
Ever since you said something about youth and how colleges and stuff, you know, it's been rolling through my mind about how, and this is a perfect example of the teachings, you know, how man is just trying to play their role in prophecy, kind of, and I believe that's a big part of it, you know. They're just causing chaos, and then one person feeds it, you know, and then there's a seed of fear planted, and it's like a snowball effect.
Yeah. Well, and then you introduce that too, Scotty, to the naivety of youth, college-age kids. They're not of the world yet. You know, they haven't seen a whole lot by then. They've lived with mommy and daddy. Mommy and daddy's still funding the way. In college, you know, you get some people up there speaking and get them all riled up to believe, oh, death to America. We have to support Palestine. Here, most of them don't even realize there is no Palestine. There is no nation of Palestine. There are Palestinian people. There is no country of Palestine. They don't know that. They don't get that. They're just simply taking in what's being fed to them. The leaven of these professional protesters is what they're getting.
I think they're trying to, well, you know, for a long time, they've been trying to erase history, you know, and they don't, you know, a lot of them don't know the history.
Yeah. Okay, in verses 17 and 18, and when Jesus knew it, they were just asking themselves, what, is he warning us because we didn't have any bread? When Jesus knew it, he saith unto them, why reason ye, because ye have no bread? Perceive ye not yet, neither understand? Have ye your heart yet hardened? Having eyes see ye not, and having ears hear ye not, and do ye not remember? Jesus' frustration, I believe, has now turned from the Pharisees, who are trying to tempt him, show us a miracle. So now his own followers not understanding what he's been trying to teach them, what he's trying to get through to them. Why are you talking, and I'm paraphrasing all of this, why are you talking about bread? Don't you get it? Are your hearts still hard? Have you not been watching? Haven't you been listening? Have you already forgotten? These people have been following him around since the beginning of his ministry. Now, obviously, he's picking up more and more as he goes along. But they've been following him along. Are you not even watching what I'm doing? Are you not listening to the words I'm speaking? As he's tried to get them to this warning. He doesn't seem to be very pleased that his disciples are missing a spiritual truth here. He's tried to be very upfront with them and get them to understand, but they're missing this. And I can't help but think he was a little frustrated about it, or maybe let down, disappointed. That these men, these closest followers, don't quite grasp that spiritual truth. So in verse 19, he says, and do you not remember, when I break the 5 loaves among 5,000, how many baskets full of fragments took ye up? They said unto him, 12. And in verse 20, and when the 7 among 4,000, how many baskets full of fragments took ye up? He said 7. So he's reminding them, talking about bread, you know, they're focused on their dinner. Do you remember when I fed the 5,000, how many baskets of leftovers you were able to pick up? 12 baskets. And when I fed 4,000, how many baskets did you take up? 7. They got that. Then how is it that you don't understand? They saw this. They were there for this miracle. So what did they miss? Exactly. What did they miss? Why are they confused about this? What spiritual truth have they missed here? Anybody? Okay. You know what? When you think about it, we looked at, and Jesus' warning about the leaven was in a negative connotation, was it not? With the Pharisees. If you add the leaven to the bad's going to grow. Think about this a second. There's some leaven to Jesus too, though, isn't there?
Yeah.
Put a little bit of Jesus in your life, and you nurture that. What's going to happen with that? It's going to grow. Your faith's going to grow. Your relationship with Him is going to get stronger.
The bad goes away.
That's right. So that leaven to Jesus, His word, His miracles, His truth. But instead of dividing and condemning, the leaven of Jesus produces fruit. The leaven of the Pharisees, what does that produce?
Division.
Chaos, discord, division, all of those things. The leaven of Jesus is the exact opposite. That produces fruit. It's actually something productive, something needful for us inside. It's not just, and again, the disciples are thinking about the bread. But the truth of Jesus, what He is providing, that's what we need to be taking in. Jesus is trying to let it, look, I'm going to take care of your needs. Your needs will be met. God's word promises that. Quit focusing on the loaf of bread. Think about that spiritual truth. That's the actual feeding that we're getting from the Lord, right? The bread of life. It's referred to the word of God, the word of the Lord. That's the bread of life. That's what we need to be taking in. Jesus is trying to get them off the worldly view, the bread. They're hungry. And think about those spiritual truths that He's been feeding them all along. So Jesus kind of, there in verse 21, the last verse of our text here, and He just looks at him and says, how is it that you don't understand? He's a little put out with this. But we needn't think that the disciples were a bunch of big dummies, right? Just like they were then, the influence that they'd had their whole lives growing up, under the influence of the Pharisees, under the influence of the political leaders of the time, they were trying to understand what Jesus was saying, but they were struggling with it. Jesus wanted them to understand, but we're the same way, aren't we? We get so influenced by false information. All of this stuff that we were talking about and all of this stuff that we can get, that we all carry on us anymore. I don't know of any grown-up that doesn't carry a smartphone anymore. And we have access to everything. And we can be inundated by false information, false teaching, false political messages. It doesn't even necessarily have to be something spiritual. There's a lot of stuff out there that can do us a lot of harm, cause a lot of division, cause a lot of chaos, a lot of discord. God doesn't want us living like that. That's not the kind of relationship we're supposed to have with one another. But if we let it, if we're not very careful, all of the false stuff that we're bringing in because we have all this access can lead us directly away from the truth and away from Jesus. And that's what we have to be careful about. All right, I'm done, everybody. I appreciate